The portrait of Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz by Miguel Cabrera is a piece of later colonial America's art, or a later America's art, and is a huge portrait. It's actually surprising how big. I will show you a picture of me with it in class so you can just see how large the portrait actually is. We'll be talking about just her and her kind of groundbreaking um, mindset she had for herself as a female during this time period in history, and then how she is portrayed by an artist after her death. So, for context, she's labeled as the first feminist, or one of the first of the Americas. And when she was young, probably not much older than you, or actually maybe younger than some of you, probably about 15, she was known to be excellent in math and science and philosophy and writing. She just was very knowledgeable and had a great intellect and was a great thinker. And she wanted to pursue those things, but she's a female, so she ends up becoming the lady in waiting at the house of the viceroy in New Spain. And if she had not done what she did, which we're going to talk about soon, you would expect Sor Juana to be a wife, a mother, to go on and take care of the home, and that really be her life. But she wanted something different. And so in order to be able to pursue her studies and her intellectual interests, she joins a religious order and becomes a nun. They were going to allow her to kind of pursue her uh, writing, her reading, and her publishing of papers and so on. And she did just that. She becomes a nun. She engages in debates, through her writing, and that with scientists, also known as philosophers. She wrote poetry. She wrote plays, and started to become very well known. And the church started to get a little bit uneasy about this. And I think that led more to her writing her most famous work, which is called The Answer. And The Answer was basically her defending the right of a woman to be a scholar, to pursue intellectual ideas, to grow in that way, versus the traditional path. And of course, she's speaking for herself, but she's really speaking for all women. So ultimately, this was kind of going too far. She was becoming too much of I don't know, like a kind of a scandalous part of their order. And they force her to give up her library in her space at where she was living. She had a library, and she had to sign a document saying she would stop her education. So she signs the document in her blood. This is when the story gets like crazy. She signs the document in her blood and says, I, Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz, the worst in the world. Um, she ends up, I think, working in the infirmary at where she was living, and ultimately gets sick from working there and dies. So I know it sounds, you know, terrible end to it, but she was so inspiring and so important in the history of women, and you know, showcasing for people what women could accomplish. So the artist Cabrera, not having met her at all, decides to paint her portrait as a tribute, and he paints her in the style that more male intellects were shown, and also inspired by a saint named Saint Jerome, who was basically the patron saint of the religious order that she belonged to. And Saint Jerome was often shown at a desk with books, or like a library around, with a book open and writing instruments. So just the fact that she's here in this space that you're seeing with all these books, which are supposed to be pretty accurate as to what books she had in her library, and that she has a book open in front of her, that she has quills, the feathers that you would write with. So he is clearly highlighting her pursuits in writing, in reading, and in the things that ultimately the church made her give up. Um, the red curtains that you see in the upper right-hand corner was common in elite portraiture. So you'd see that color and that kind of fabric scene, and you see it here. Elite in her pursuits, elite in her mind, and that she looks straight out at us, and that she's proud. She's, I'm not saying she's confrontational, but she's not shying away from who she is in this image. I like that Cabrera shows her as that, and not just the religious side. And there's nothing wrong with the religious side of her. It allowed her a lot of freedoms for a while. So they do show her with her rosary beads, and they show her with this giant nun's badge that she's wearing, and I'm pointing to that. So they are showing the things that would be expected to be seen in a nun. But I like that he is showing her also then in the great love, the other great love really of her life, and maybe the great love, which was knowledge. And so again, that is the portrait of Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz. I think for function, this definitely has portrait. And I think that's their main focal point here is portrait. And, could you say religious? I would stick more with just regular portrait, but although you could say it is a religious portrait, it has so much more than that. Formal quality is one, color, because the red in the image kind of elevates it and associates it with elite portraits of its time. That's one. I think emphasis, because all the text that you can clearly see, all the books, the horizontal books behind her that you clearly see, we are emphasizing her as a great intellect of her time. And so I think those are the things I would focus on in function and formal quality. So that again is Portrait of Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz by Miguel Cabrera.